Hello there. This is All 24 News, Russia-Ukraine special coverage with me, Karim Zachary, your host. As the Russia-Ukraine war enters its 67th day, Ukraine has mounted a strong defense despite being vastly outnumbered. But Russian bombing and shelling have pummeled Ukraine cities. Civilian casualties are growing by the day, and the fighting has sparked an enormous refugee crisis. Now it's unclear what will happen next, but high-stakes questions loom large. How might the conflict evolve on the ground and at the negotiating table? And what can the West do to halt the conflict while mitigating the risk of a wider war between Russia and NATO? And to delve into more analysis on this tense situation, I am joined live via Skype by Volodymyr Solovyin, political scientist at the New Geopolitics Research Network from Kyiv, Ukraine, along with Manuel Pouchelet, university lecturer and geopolitical analyst from Paris, France. Thank you, gentlemen, for joining us. The discussion begins right after this break. And before we commence the discussion, allow me to share with you these updates. Speaking in his evening address, Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky said on Saturday that Russia had lost more than 23,000 soldiers in what he described a senseless war. He added that Ukraine had destroyed more than 1,000 military tanks since the beginning of the conflict.
Our defenders have already destroyed more than 1,000 Russian tanks, almost 200 Russian planes, almost 2,500 armored fighting vehicles. Of course, the occupiers still have equipment in stock. Yes, they still have missiles to strike our territory. But this war has already weakened Russia so much that they have to plan for even fewer military equipment to take part in parade in Moscow.
So let me start with you, Mr. Volodymyr Solovyin. You are in Ukraine, and more specifically in Kyiv. As you've seen and heard, Ukrainian President Zelensky described the so-called Russian special military operation in his country a senseless war. What can you tell us on the situation on the ground for the moment?
Thanks for having me.
Most welcome.
So until now we have the second week of Russian offensive in Donbas region. It was thought that it will become a crucial one, but as for now we see that Russia failed to achieve its main goal. For Russian propaganda, it was a kind of fetish to encircle Ukrainian troops in Donbas. And I think that it was the main goal before the war, but on some stage of planning, political calculations prevailed, and they tried to move towards Kyiv and change the power change authorities in Ukrainian capital. But after they failed to siege and to conquer northern parts of Ukraine and Ukrainian capital, they returned to their second stage of war, and Russia tries to conquer the two regions of Ukraine. It's Lugansk and Donetsk Oblast, and Ukraine was well prepared for such a development, and there are most capable Ukrainian forces, units of Ukrainian armed forces, and still we see that Russia failed to achieve their main goals.
Mm-hmm.
If you look at the map of the battlefield, the most crucial front line is around Izium axis, and there is three wings of Russian offensive groups that tries to move to the south to cut supply lines that are crucial for Ukrainian troops, but still after more than 2 months of battles, Ukraine had enough time to threaten and to fix its position, to prepare new defense lines, and to prevent Russia from much more crucial shifts on this theater of war.
And what are your expectations and predictions, Volodymyr Solivian, about the war lingering on? How long do you think this is going to continue? And how long do Ukrainians have to suffer the consequences?
Well, we have to wait until Ukraine will be supplied with enough amount of Western weaponry. This is a very crucial challenge for Ukrainian armed forces to exchange post-Soviet weaponry and to train and be capable to use NATO standards. For example, we have to exchange our 152 Soviet millimeter artillery towards 155. Which is the NATO standard ones, and the big problem is lack of military depots. So we have to move this weaponry and munition from our western borders, and this is a huge logistics because it is more than 1,000 kilometers from Lviv to Donbas.
And do you expect that the West will actually comply to Ukraine request by sending heavy weaponry? And we have heard just recently that Germany actually refused to send any heavy weaponry, which is understandable. Perhaps they are trying to avoid a direct clash with Russia. What's your take on this?
Yes, look, I think that this German position is senseless because Russia already poses Germany as a NATO state that helps Ukraine and the conflict partner of the part of the conflict. So I think that in some way, maybe in some months, Germany will reconsider its position. So we are talking not about the position of the whole Germany, but especially Chancellor Scholz, because local opposition makes pressure towards government, and maybe weaponry producers will also make enough shift to make Mr. Scholz to change his own position. But on the other hand, we are witnessing that Germany is willing to exchange those amounts of weaponry, post-Soviet weaponry that is supplied to Ukraine from Central European countries such as Slovakia, Germany, Romania, and so on. So it's not a big problem that Germany is reluctant to provide Ukraine with enough weaponry, because it is still a working scheme when Germany provides its own weaponry towards those NATO countries that send their own armored vehicles, and maybe in some time it will be aircrafts and so on, to exchange this weaponry that is provided to Ukraine.
Very clear indeed. Thank you. Now I would like to include Mr. Manuel Poșle in our discussion as a geopolitical analyst. What is your saying about the development in Ukraine recently? Zelensky is claiming to have destroyed thousands of Russian tanks along with other military means of transportation. Can we see this as a step forward to free Ukraine?
Yes, but today President Zelensky is acting with communication, So giving key figures concerning the Ukrainian conflict is to ensure his position on his strategy to his Western support, I think. And giving every day a number of tanks destroyed and so on is a way for him to give that Ukraine will win the conflict. In fact, it sounds like an American speech, giving the key figures of the conflict is today the new step of the Ukrainian strategy, I think, okay? but it's also a message delivered to the Ukrainian population and to say, okay, guys, we are moving on and we are going forward.
And what is the position of France in this? I mean, since you're in France, do you think that France will join Germany's, let's say, position by not, let's say, providing heavy weaponry to Ukraine in order to defend itself?
Yes, in fact, France, a few days ago, we received an important speech from the Army Chief of Staff. And he said, okay, he said to the French troops, be prepared. But concerning France, it sounds a secret because it's the special domain reserved to the President of the Republic. And France announced to support Ukraine with sending automotive cannon, Caesar system, 155 millimeters shell, which is very efficient to shell in the deepness. And of course, France provides also other supports like infantry missile, light infantry missile, like Milan missile, of course, against its anti-tank system. But I would like to underline one thing. As soon as you adopt a new weapon, a new weaponry system, you have to adopt the doctrine of use, which requires a long experience. And it can't be done in a few months to be efficient, because today the weapons we send to Ukraine are answering to a specific doctrine of use. And of course, you need a specific training to use this weapon. So I think I am a little bit doubtful about the immediate efficiency of this use, but of course it will help Ukraine to be more offensive on the battleground, and it's very important to underline this aspect.
Very nice indeed. Now, from the Russian side, Igor Konashenkov, a Russian Defense Ministry spokesman, said in a statement that Russia has hit 17 Ukrainian military facilities with high-precision missiles on Saturday, and also destroyed a command post and a warehouse used to store rockets and artillery. Let's take a listen.
Высокоточными ракетами воздушного базирования в течение дня
high-precision airspace missiles of the Russian aerospace forces have hit 17 Ukrainian military assets during the day, among them 8 areas of manpower and equipment concentration, 5 artillery and multiple rocket launcher firing position, and 2 strong points. Also destroyed 1 command post and 1 missile and artillery weapons depot near Pokrovsky region.
и районов сосредоточения живой силы и техники.
Back to you, Mr. Volodymyr Solivian. Ukraine is said to have destroyed some of Russia's assets, and now even Russia is claiming to have destroyed Ukrainian military facilities. This means the situation on the ground is escalating and both sides are not willing to lay down their arms. What's your take on this? How do you think this is going to get more complicated or maybe resolved?
Yes, I think that first of all, we should not be so we should take in account that there is an information war, and for example, according to Russian sources, according to Minister of Defense of Russian Federation, they already destroyed all Ukrainian tanks and even more aircrafts that Ukraine had before. Obviously, these numbers are just fairy
propaganda.
Tales. And yes, Ukraine also may take a part in this propaganda, but if we compare with Western numbers, Ukrainian ones are not so huge. And there are, if we talk just about numbers on destroyed Russian armored vehicles, tanks, and so on, there are many photos, videos, and that make us to be sure that Russia has very big losses. And another thing of that is that many Russian troops are reluctant to go offensive, and those troops that were withdrawn from northern directions from Kyiv, they among those troops, there are about 20% of soldiers that are not willing to invade Ukraine on the second time. So that means that Russia is facing with a problem that and they feel the lack of manpower. They still have enough weaponry. They outnumber Ukrainian forces in terms of artillery, armored vehicles, but their soldiers are not so well motivated as Ukrainian ones. So I think that Russia does not have any chances to win this campaign without providing additional mobilization. There are some rumors that such step may be occurred after 9th of May, that is the biggest state holiday for Russia and has a big importance in terms of state propaganda.
Very nice. What about you, Mr. Manuel Pushle? Can we talk about a ceasefire anytime soon? I mean, we see the situation on the ground getting more and more tense and more complicated, and we see clashes between the two sides. And of course, each side is saying that we have less losses than the other. But then what about diplomatic talks? Can we find any resolution anytime soon? A ceasefire, maybe?
So, concerning a ceasefire, I think it's too soon to talk about it. But the main goal and the main challenge for Mr. Putin is the exit of this war. I mean, he would like to say, I am the winner, and I am the winner because I did that, and so on. But at the moment, it is very difficult to announce when it will come. According to French specialists and geopolitics analysts in France, I have heard this week that maybe the end of this conflict is announced to be on May the 9th, because it will be the victory, of the Russian forces against Germany. But today, with the UN participation to diplomatic talks, the Turkish role in these talks too, I think that Mr. Putin has to face with a lot of possibilities, but he would like to remain the main actor and to have the ending words, So it is difficult, but the first conclusion I can say today is his goal is now achieved, because he conquered the Russian part of Ukraine with the Russian minorities. He won't come back to the other part of Ukraine because this situation will be difficult to manage. The population will resist, and of course the Ukrainian forces are stronger than it was announced. So maybe the next step will be the conquest of Russian minorities in Moldova, and here we have to be careful because Europe is at the gate. So we don't know if Mr. Putin will close the access or will deny the access to the sea, the Black Sea, to Ukraine. Is a coming step, I think. So at the moment, maybe the latest goal for Mr. Putin is to reunify the Russian minorities in Ukraine and Moldova. And I think this is the coming challenge. And maybe the other challenge also for Mr. Putin will to punish European countries because of their position on latest speech. I'm talking about Poland, who is greeting refugees, of course, and hosting refugees. But recently, the Poland heads of states had a very strong speech against Russia, and maybe Mr. Putin announced sanctions against Poland.
Very nice indeed. And do you think that this is where it's going to stop? Just the areas where there are minorities speaking Russian, or maybe there could be other advances, other claims by Russia? And even if this happens, and let's say Russia is successful by taking control of these regions where there are minorities speaking Russian, is the world going to make a compromise? Is Ukraine going to make a compromise and just let President Putin do whatever he wants?
Yeah, in fact, I think that this conflict could be an important announce of the coming future of European Union, which is imprisoned by the American point of view. And I think both parts are seeking for compromises, and it's very important to say that because economically speaking, Russia is suffering, but we don't have any declaration in this field, of course. And even if the key figures, the latest economical key figures are good, we don't know. We don't have any idea of how long it will be the case. Russia is a big country. We have no indicators concerning the Asian part of Russia, which is working well, but concerning the European part. The main goal is to stop the fighting, but also somebody is pushing to stop this war is Europe, of course, but indirectly we can think about China because we have the Belt Road, the Railway Belt Road, who are supposed to cross Ukraine. Mr. Xi Jinping, the Chinese president, is expecting for peace at the moment because his project is getting late and with important economical problems for him and for his economy. And I think the main goal of both parts, Ukrainian part and the Russian part, is to stop and to find out compromises. And I think it's important. But in diplomacy, when you don't have declaration, it means it runs well.
Very nice indeed. And now, in related news, Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky on Saturday held an in-person meeting with U.S. House of Representatives Speaker Nancy Pelosi in Kyiv and shared a video of her visiting Zelensky, and he thanked the West's strong support for Ukraine.
Thank you for this gesture of strong support for Ukraine from the United States, the people of the United States, Congress, bicameral and bipartisan support. As President, our team and the people of Ukraine, I greatly appreciate this gesture. Today, the United States is the leader in strong support for Ukraine during the war against the aggression of the Russian Federation.
Now, let me address you, Mr. Volodymyr Solivian, as Ukrainian. How can you see, or how do you see the US and NATO allies in Europe who are trying to help Ukraine fight off Russian aggression, as they called it? What are we going to expect from their support? It's been more than 2 months and Russia hasn't withdrawn from Ukraine despite the sanctions. And is this support going to help curb the so-called aggression?
Yes, of course. Sanctions is not a toolkit that will end the war in several months. This pressure will harden Russian economy, will make a pressure, but this is a story for years, and maybe it will not end in Ukraine. But as now we are witnessing a strengthening of Western position. And I think that crucial moment was Bucha massacres and the fate of Mariupol that made a crucial shift in position of Western societies. And now we see that the United States and Great Britain intends to weaken Russia's positions in response to its invasion in Ukraine. And the main strategy is to weaken enough Russian military capabilities enough to prevent such refrains and such attacks from Russia in the future. So the main goal is to defeat Russian army in Ukraine. And as we see, Ukrainian forces are capable to do so, but still we need weaponry and time to...
But why haven't the weaponry arrived yet? I mean, Ukraine has been asking for heavy weaponry for a long time, and we don't see any weaponries being delivered. Can we expect that maybe there is a party who have a certain interest in the war lingering on? What's your take on this?
Look, Russia is not willing to negotiate in terms of goodwill. They still make pressure on Ukraine on battlefield and are reluctant to withdraw from southern parts of Ukraine, and we still don't know what their purposes are. There are many rumors about annexation of Kherson Oblast, for example, not just Donbas region, and obviously it will be a defeat for Russia to withdraw, and Putin understand it clearly. So there are no chances for long-term agreements. Just maybe some negotiation on peace to win time and prepare for both sides, for Ukraine as well and for Russia, because Russia have to mobilize additional forces, because still it's providing war with the army of a peaceful time. And in terms of servicemen, Ukraine outnumbers Russian forces, just because according to Western and Ukrainian estimates, there are only 92 battalion tactic groups that already invade in Ukraine, and plus about 30,000 troops from separatist so-called republics. It's not enough to conquer second and the biggest country in Europe with the mobilized army. So in terms of long-term war, Ukraine have beneficial positions.
And
but
in
still,
a related matter, let me cut your train of thought. Sorry about that. In an interview, Sergei Lavrov stated that if the US and NATO are serious about resolving the issue, they should cease arming Ukraine. Moscow claims that supplying weapons will exacerbate the situation and heighten the stakes of the fight, describing the transfer of munitions as pouring a gasoline on the fire. Back to you, Volodymyr Solivian. Western nations have imposed broad economic sanctions on Russia and also supplied Ukraine with heavy weaponry. What are the results? Are there any positive developments for Ukraine? I mean, how efficient is the West's support?
I think that Ukraine cannot accept a new status quo and new borderlines that we are witnessing on the battlefield, because it will make a pause and it will threaten our security in nearest future. Obviously, as we see in Kharkiv region, Russians may shell the second biggest city of Ukraine from their own territory. If we will accept Russian position and will abandon Donbas region, for example, the second biggest city of
Which
Kharkiv,
is a compromise that Ukrainians are not willing to make, right?
Yes, we have to defeat Russia on the battlefield, and only after we may achieve reasonable negotiations. Because now there is no possibility to achieve any peace. Maybe such intensive battles will not occur for long months.
Very nice, Mr. Sullivan. Thank you so much. Since we're running out of time, I would like to give a final word to Mr. Manuel Pushlet. Mr. Manuel Pushlet, briefly, please. Under what circumstances do you think is Russia likely to pull back its military intervention in Ukraine? And do you think the West and its allies will be involved in this?
Yes, in fact, as a conclusion, I can say that this situation sounds like the one in France in 1870, when Germany conquered the east part of France in Lorraine and Alsace. And I think that the coming step for Russia will be the stabilization of the Russian part of Ukraine. And it will be a real challenge for Mr. Putin. But according to the latest information we have today, it will be impossible to manage economically poorly because you have sanctions against Russia. And also the European Union has the difficulties to do at first early lessons. And of course, lessons learned will come maybe after 1 year.
Very nice indeed. Thank you both gentlemen for joining us. Thank you, dear viewers, for keeping it here on All 24 News. Special coverage on the Russia-Ukraine file. That's it for me and the rest of the team. Bye for now.